In today's video, I want to give you guys some of the best practical tips to help you guys to shoot better sunsets. And these aren't going to be your standard tips that you might find on the internet. Hopefully they're a little bit different than what you would otherwise find, but I'm really excited for it, guys. Hey everybody, if you haven't been here before, welcome. If you have, welcome also. My name is Austin James Jackson. I'm a professional landscape photographer based here in the beautiful southern Utah area. As you can see, it's beautiful out here right now. Tonight, I decided to come out to Zion National Park, which is what you're seeing behind me here. And it is about 45 minutes before sunset. So I'm posted up, I climbed up this mountain and I'm shooting sunset. And while I'm out here thinking about it, I wanted to make a nice video for you guys covering some of my favorite tips in order to take better sunset images. So that's exactly what we're going to do in today's video. Now, maybe you know me and maybe you don't, but I like to cut right to the chase, so let's go ahead and jump right in there. Now, the first tip surrounds the direction in which you're shooting. Now, as a landscape photographer, the sky could, of course, go off in any direction. There might be good light in any direction, but more often than not, if your goal is to get a portfolio-worthy, really great shot, you want to find a composition, and this is whether you're shooting sunset or sunrise, but you want to find a composition where the sun's within 90 degrees of where you're pointing your camera. I like it somewhere between 0 and 90 degrees. So the way that you can figure out if you're not a math person is point one hand, say point your left hand at your composition, point your right hand at the sun. And you want one hand to be straight out, one hand straight forwards is the furthest away you want the sun. Now that basically gives you a whole 180 degrees that you could shoot. So essentially if you look at the sun, you can shoot any direction in front of you. And the reason why I like to shoot like that is because, like I said, I know that the sky can go off in any direction, but it's going to give me the best chance to catch some light on my scene, especially in the clouds. If the clouds are good, it's more than likely going to be somewhat towards the sunset. It's not going to be the opposite direction. Now, shooting the opposite direction can yield some nice results. It's going to yield you basically just sunlight. You're likely not going to get any clouds. You will get some nice sunlight, which can be nice for some shots. But if you really want those wide, grand landscapes where it's just absolutely stunning sky, stunning light, you want to find a composition that faces within 90 degrees of the sun. Now, a lot of times I like to shoot straight into the sun. This comes with its challenges and its drawbacks. While some photos looking right into the sun are awesome, if you've got the right composition, you can get some shadows in the foreground, you can get some beautiful clouds, and you can get that nice starburst or that beautiful glowing sun out there. But I find that it's easier to get good quality photos if you're shooting like 45 degrees away from the sun. So right now the sun is pretty much directly that way, pretty much directly to the left of the video composition here. And I'm shooting basically kind of diagonal of the video composition here. So the sun is about probably 30 degrees difference, which is perfect because I don't have the sun in my frame. I don't have to worry about it blowing out or anything, but my scene is also going to catch a lot of nice light. You know, if I'm shooting a mountain and the sun is right behind it, sure, I might get good clouds, but I'm not going to get light on that mountain. Whereas if I'm shooting something that's side lit, it's going to look so much better when I'm able to catch a little bit of that side light because it's going to light up my scene and ultimately it's going to give me more depth. That's what really makes landscape photography good, is when you can add a little bit of depth to your photos, they're going to look so much better. Now, my next tip here might sound obvious, but you would be surprised how many photographers don't do this. You want to show up plenty early to your scene or scout it out in advance so you have multiple compositions picked out. Right now, I'm planning on shooting this cool feature to my left here that I showed you earlier, but I have another spot that's kind of down this mountain here that faces a little bit different direction. And the reason why you want to do that is because then you'll be able to get great photos even if the light goes off in a different direction. Now, you don't need to have a composition in every single direction, though it is nice if you do, but you should get there early. Don't plan on getting there 10 minutes before sunset and thinking you're going to get a great shot, because honestly, you probably won't. You need to scout out multiple different compositions. Of course, this is different if you're going to a location that is well known for a particular shot. It's already been scouted out for you. But if you're up here like I am here in Zion, never seen a photo from up here before, I simply just kind of Google Earthed it, found a spot, you're gonna wanna get out there early so that you can scout out those compositions before the light is good. Now, additionally, when we talk about time, I want to mention that you should be chasing light, not clouds. I made an Instagram reel recently covering this, and there was a fair amount of pushback, and I was pretty surprised. Trust me when I say this, if your photos have sunlight, that is so much better than great beautiful clouds. If you've got great beautiful clouds but everything is all shaded in your scene, there's not going to be very much depth. It's going to be so much better if you can get that sunlight right before the sun goes down. So for example, I'm out here, the sun is going to go behind that canyon wall here in probably about 5 minutes. So right now is the time when I want to be shooting. I don't want to wait for the clouds, because if I wait for the clouds, then unfortunately I'm going to have flat light on my scene and there's going to be absolutely no separation, which leads into tip number 3. Now this rule applies to any kind of landscape photography, but especially at sunset or sunrise. You want your subject to have some separation from the background. When you're out here shooting something like this in the desert, I might be looking for a rock that has some really good separation or contrast with what's behind it. I want to frame my scene in such a way that my subject maybe protrudes into the sky or protrudes into a place where there's high contrast. You know, because if I'm out here and I'm shooting all these rocks and my background is rocks, you can't quite tell where one rock ends and another rock begins, and you lose a lot of depth in your image. So separation is key. I think separation is huge in all kinds of photography, but especially for sunrise and sunset, you need to pay attention to that separation. Now that can look like having white snow behind your subject in the distance on a mountain. I mean, it can look like a whole variety of things, but essentially make sure that your subject has something right behind the subject that makes it stand out. Make sure you give it plenty of space to be there in that really high contrast area to give that separation, because that's really going to help you take your photos to the next level. Look at your favorite photographer's photos and you'll probably notice that they are more often than not finding that separation from their subject to the midground to the background in order to help create those really great scenes, as this applies to wide angle shooting. Tip number 4 here is to know your gear. And I've been doing a podcast lately, which if you haven't heard, I'll put a link down below. But essentially you need to learn your gear. A lot of the guests on my podcast have mentioned how important it is for photographers to know their gear. Now the reason I say this, and especially for sunrises and sunsets, is because they happen quickly. You need to be able to adjust camera settings quickly. You don't want to be out there trying to figure out why the focus isn't working or why is that red light there or whatever it may be when the sun is going down, because you're missing your opportunity to capture some great shots. Now additionally, you want to know your camera gear really well because you want to know the dynamic range of your camera. I know on my camera, this Sony a7R IV here, which shoots excellent images, not sponsored by the way, I just love my Sony a7R IV, shoots great images. It has a really high dynamic range. Like, it's arguably the best dynamic range sensor. It's probably tied with like the top end Nikon camera right now. And the reason why it's important to know that dynamic range is because when I'm shooting a sunset, I'm shooting an image that has a lot of dynamic range in it. So the sky is really bright, the foreground's really dark. Now if you're shooting with an older camera with a sensor that's maybe not as nice and with not as much dynamic range, then you're probably going to need to bracket your shots, which means you're going to need to take a separate exposure for the sky, a separate one for the foreground, so you can have both exposures where you have something that is the correct exposure basically, so that your foreground isn't completely black and your sky is not completely blown out. On my Sony a7R IV, I know that if I expose for the highlights or expose to the right, is the other term that people use, that my image will be fine. I'll be able to pull up those shadows just fine. I've never done an HDR bracket on my camera here because I haven't needed to. I like my darks to stay naturally dark, but I do usually bring them up a little bit. And then the highlights I usually bring down, but I want to make sure not to blow out the highlights. You also want to know how to bring up the histogram because you want to be able to see exactly what you're looking at in your image, and you want to make sure you're not blowing out anything in the sky. If you're blowing out just a small portion where the sun is at, that's totally fine. I like editing my image and leaving that little section blown out, but you don't want to blow out the whole sky, and that's something that a lot of people will do if you're shooting in like auto, or if you're shooting in a mode other than manual, you may make that mistake. If you're shooting in aperture priority, shoot in like -1.7. That's going to help you in order to not overexpose. So nailing the exposure is really important, and that is why you really want to know your gear. Now, the fifth and final tip here is to shoot on a tripod. And the reason why I say that is kind of twofold here. First of all, you want to shoot on a tripod because as the sun's going down, it's going to get darker. You may need to open up that exposure, and so you want to shoot on a tripod so that you're not hand holding your images and making it blurry. Now you also want to use a tripod because you're going to be shooting images for probably at least 30 or 45 minutes as the sun is going down. This is really important because when you're out shooting, you may find there's better conditions in one aspect of your photo at one point in time and another at another point in time. Now, I know that a lot of photographers don't believe in image blending, but I'm telling you, most of the top landscape photographers out there are doing it. So if you want to create some portfolio-worthy images, it's something I highly recommend trying. Now, if you leave your camera in the same exact spot, you can pretty easily blend images where maybe the light is better over here, then the light's better over there, maybe the clouds are better here. You can blend images and create realistic looking images where you're kind of blending multiple spots that are 5, 10, 15 minutes apart. Like I said, I know it's not for everybody, I totally understand, but I am just here to tell you it is a fact that a lot of the top landscape photographers today are doing this, and I think it's something that you should certainly explore if you're interested in furthering your photography. Alrighty guys, well that's all she wrote. Hopefully that helps you guys in order to take some better sunset and sunrise images. I know those are surely things that would have helped me a long time ago when I was first starting my photography. If it was helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, leave me a comment. I love to hear from you guys. I love to hear if these videos are actually helpful for you guys, or if you have any feedback or anything like that. I love to hear it down below. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.